Few moments in the story of the liquidation of Chernobyl are as well known as the helicopter crash of October 2nd, 1986. It is to the point that, in the HBO miniseries, the creators of the show moved it from October to April 27th, just so they could include a recreation of the shot in their show and use it to highlight the dangers of flying into the radioactive emissions emanating from Reactor 4. I want to talk today, this video releasing on the 37th anniversary of the crash, about the victims and to bring their story to light. Vladimir Konstantinovich Vorobyov, just 30 years old, was a veteran of the war in Afghanistan and a master of avoiding death. During said conflict, he had survived his helicopter being shot down and the subsequent crash landing. The rest of his crew were killed, though he sustained a leg injury and a heavy concussion, but was able to escape the wreckage and make his way to safety, for which he was awarded the Order of the Red Star. Sometime later, he earned another. After returning from Afghanistan, he was involved in another accident, where a truck drove into his motorcycle, but after a few weeks in hospital, he was fit and active once more. Stationed in the small Siberian city of Chita, the father of two entered the Battle of Chernobyl in September of 1986. Naturally, he wasn't alone in enrolling in this dangerous conflict between man and the atom. His navigator, Senior Lieutenant Alexander Youngkind, had come with him. Youngkind was supposed to have been deployed to Afghanistan, although his doctor recommended he postpone his tour due to illness, and by the time he recovered, Chernobyl had become the primary threat. At home were his wife and 1-year-old daughter. Shortly before he left, his wife informed him that she was pregnant. Their family would grow even more. They were also joined by their flight engineer, Leonid Kristich. Kristich was also a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, and he too had almost experienced a crash landing like Vorobyov had, when he came under fire of the Afghan military, and shells tore through the fuel tanks. In order to save the helicopter, Kristich covered the holes with his hands to limit the fuel loss and allow them to safely return to base. The helicopter the three were piloting was part of a formation of two helicopters. The two aircraft, designated Cup 1 and Cup 2, were scheduled to fly in formation over the remains of Reactor 4 that day. Cup 1, carrying a mixture of lead and sand, would dump the material into the reactor hull. Cup 2, immediately behind, would then drop a PVA glue over the materials to stick it together and reduce the amount of radioactive dust escaping from Unit 4. Preparations were made for the series of flights and loading of the 2.5 tons of PVA glue into the massive buckets that hanged beneath the helicopters. This was assisted by 26-year-old Nikolai Ganzhuk. While he may have been a mechanic, he specialised in loading weaponry as part of a helicopter regiment, and therefore he was invited to join the crew that day in order to assist in the dropping of the glue mixture into the reactor hull. The day before their infamous sortie, Igor Kostin, the now famous journalist who helped to document Chernobyl, visited the site to photograph the crews of Cup 1 and Cup 2. The pilot of Cup 1, Vyacheslav Zernikin, refused as he felt it would be bad luck. But Vorobyov agreed to it, and all 4 crew, as well as other scientists around, gathered for the photograph. Perhaps Vorobyov, too, sensed this bad luck, and on the evening of October 1st, he sent a series of heartwarming letters to his friends and family, as well as his gold wedding ring, to his wife as a gift. That morning, October 2nd, started like any other. The group woke up early, had a daily health examination with a doctor, and stopped for food in the canteen. The helicopters were given pre-flight checks, and then orders to Cup 1 to carry the sand and boron mixture, and for Cup 2 to carry the adhesive were given. And then, at 6 AM, they were off into combat. The flight system was repetitive and stretched throughout the day. The 2 helicopters would fly the 20-minute route to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, drop their loads into the core, fly the 20 minutes back to the helicopter site, and refuel and reload for the next mission. The two crews repeated the task throughout the day, flying and dropping their payloads into the reactor hull, the only challenge being to avoid the cables dangling from the demag cranes that surrounded the sarcophagus. This wasn't a challenge at first, due to flags marking the locations of each cable to the pilots, but as the day grew older and the sun shifted west on the horizon, the flags gradually became less and less visible. Complicating the matters further, one of the cables lacked even these flags, and was becoming almost invisible in the sun glare. Though none of the crews on the two helicopters were aware of it, the build-up to a disaster was unfolding. It was shortly after 5 PM that day when Cup 1 and Cup 2 returned for another sortie over Unit 4, and as always, the workers on the ground paused and gathered to look at them. But, by chance, a filmmaker from Siberia by the name of Viktor Grebenyuk had also stopped to watch the crew. Grebenyuk was employed by the West Siberian Newsreel studio, sent to Chernobyl to capture the heroic efforts of the liquidation, and the helicopters certainly captured just that. In contrast to the calm on the ground, the scene in the air was fast becoming a nightmare for the crews of Cup 1 and Cup 2, with Cup 1 unable to see the cables dangling from the cranes clearly from their vantage point. They had to rely on Vorobyov's orders to navigate them over the core. Come a little to the right. You still have 3 meters to the wall. Go ahead, stop. I see the foot of the crane. If it wasn't for the actions of Cup 2, then Zernikin and the rest of Cup 1 would have likely struck the cables. They were so close, Zernikin thought, that he could have reached a hand out of the helicopter and held on to them. With Cup 1 dropping their load into the core, they successfully navigated away from the cables as Grebenyuk filmed from below. Then Cup 2 flew over the reactor. The PVA began dropping down into the core. But Vorobyov lacked the same guidance he had given to Zernikin, relying purely on the now almost invisible flags to ensure his safety. So he chose a path that led away from the marked cables and directly towards a cable that was unmarked, now invisible in the sunset. The helicopter blades tore into the steel cables, shattering both the wires and the fast-travelling blades of the helicopter. Losing all lift, the helicopter was thrown away from the force of the impact with the cables, spinning on its back as the tail blade of the craft was torn to the side in the forces of destruction. The helicopter plummeted 100 meters to the ground, disappearing out of sight from the view of Grebenyuk as it fell south of the building, narrowly avoiding the turbine hall by just 5 meters. Zernikin and his crew watched from above, helpless, as their friends perished, and then a panicked call on the radio from their commander demanding they regroup and return to base. Zernikin requested they land first, so his crew had a chance to recover from the traumatic sight they had witnessed, but he was overruled and the helicopter flew the 20 minutes back to base. It was close to midnight when Zernikin returned back to collect his comrades from the crash. The helicopter landed, and he had to wait as each of the 4 men were brought aboard. After spending 7 hours close to Unit 4, the men were all contaminated to the point it maxed out the onboard dosimeter, and Zernikin flew at the helicopter's top speed of 320 km per hour to Kiev, where proper funerals could be held for the 4 men. The helicopter crash was initially covered up, information suppressed to avoid any controversy about the difficulties of the liquidation. Vorobyov, Youngkind, Kristich, and Ganchuk all received posthumous orders of the Red Star, while their death certificates simply stated multiple bone fractures, denying their families any financial benefits in spite of their deaths. When the details of the helicopter accident became public in the mid-1990s, they finally received them. At the helipad where Cup 2 took off, a memorial for the 4 men was created using the only surviving piece of debris usable, a singular blade from the helicopter that was thrown off during the impact with the cable, and a brass plaque bearing the names of all 4 victims. The wife of Alexander Youngkind, the flight navigator, gave birth to a son, Sasha Youngkind. 10 years after the accident, he was interviewed for a documentary where he said he wanted to become a pilot like his father. On December 6, 2017, a work crew helping to dismantle the old sarcophagus under the new safe confinement uncovered remains of Cook 2's tail, which was thrown from the craft as it fell to the ground. There were plans to transfer this to a museum once it had been fully decontaminated. I would like to finish this video by taking a moment to mention the hundreds of helicopter pilots and crewmen who participated in the cleanup. From those who were involved from the first days, flying over the core to determine if the reactor was exposed or not, to those who helped to dump material into the reactor hull to suppress radionuclide emissions, and those who helped build the sarcophagus in the months that followed. Many of them were exposed well above the minimum dose associated with an increase in the likelihood of cancer, though very few follow-ups on their health were conducted. In memory of all pilots who served and sacrificed.